გამარჯობა. ვინც ახლა შემოგვემატეთ, მოგესალმებით. დღევანდელი დღის მეორე დისკუსია შეეხება თხრობას და იმას თუ როგორ ცვლის მულტიმედიურობა და საერთოდ ტექნოლოგია თავისი ფართო გაგებით ლიტერატურას. So the next panel is about story narration. How does multimedia and technology in general affect literature? The panelists are the moderator for the event, Khatuna Tskadadze, Georgian writer Eva Prezuashvili, from Netherlands, the wonderful and long-awaited in Georgia Jan Baker, and our wonderful Neva Lukic from Croatia. So I'm going to give the stage over to you. Good luck and thank you.
Thank you, Nuka. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Khatuna. I'm translator myself, so I'm part of profession in a way, so I'm really delighted to hold this discussion of today. I try to contribute somehow. And I want to just briefly present our wonderful guests of today. As Nuka mentioned, Jan Bakke from Netherlands, right next to me. Jan is a poet, translator, editor, and curator, right? His first collection was published in '97, and his fourth collection was nominated for the VSB Poetry Prize. He won the prestigious Jan Kampert Poetry Prize in 2016, and his the most recent collection was published in 2022, right? Jan works cooperates with various magazines and anthologies in Netherlands and in other countries. And since 2006, together with visual artist and composer Alfred Marcel, I'm not sure about my pronunciation, he's been making poetry films, data poems. It's so interesting. I will ask you about all this later. Text and images driven by data traffic. Wow. Sound pieces and installations. And besides being a poet and translator, Jan is one of the programmers of famous Poetry International Festival in Rotterdam. So welcome. Neva Lukic from Croatia. Neva is a writer and curator, currently living between Zagreb and Belgrade, right, Neva? She is author of several collections of poetry, short stories, two picture books. She writes for theater and radio, and she is an author of a short experimental film, too. By practicing interdisciplinary approaches towards visual arts and literature, she also tends to create artworks close to video performance or radio, theater play in collaboration with other artists. Her poems and short stories have been published in various printed and electronic magazines. And she received Zdravko, right? Zdravko Puchak Award, Croatian Matrix Award for a poetry collection. Thank you, Neva, for being with us. And Eva, our beloved Georgian author, many of you, I assume, know him, is a multiple award-winning Georgian author. Eva is also a screenwriter, and he is also current president of Pen Georgia, by the way. He studied at the University of Cinema and Theater in Georgia, and he wrote and directed also TV series Tiflis. His second novel was awarded Garbage Shoot, right? Bunkeri, we all know that in Georgian. Was awarded EU Prize for Literature in 2022 and Jury Special Prize for Saba Literary Award in 2021. And many other prizes, actually. Eva's latest novel, which just came up, right? Mascarafone, appeared just recently, this year. Thank you, Eva, for being here with us. So I was thinking, our theme of this year's festival is future. But future, somehow we thought about future of literature, future in literature also, and how somehow the future of literature will be, what future of literature will be in the digital age, which is so fast changing, and in the world where the written text is so often combined in a way with other genres, And, well, I think that this period of time somehow reversed and changed the very understanding of genre itself, because everything is merging, everything goes together, and it's really difficult to even define the boundaries between the genres. So I just thought to start our discussion of today asking to our wonderful guests about the understanding of writer and how much they perceive themselves working in different media, with different genres, and using so many artistic means for their expression, how they define themselves and how much they define themselves as writers.
You want me? Yes. Do you want to talk?
Hello. I work a lot as a curator. I studied art history. So yes, I must say that all the visual artists, they finish art academy and then they call themselves artists. And from my perspective, I always had some kind of respect towards the term artist or a writer. So I somehow approach it with some kind of respect, and I think it's not easy word to say whether I'm a writer or an artist, and today so many artists and writers tend to use this word easily. So from that perspective, that would be my answer, that I'm cautious with it. And from the perspective you asked about using different media and how the literature is changing. I think that here we need to distinguish two things. One is multimedia and an interdisciplinary approach towards literature, and that's maybe including all these different media which we also use, sometimes in collaboration with visual artists. And another thing is how maybe social networks change literature. So I think these are somehow two maybe close topics, but still completely different. So maybe somebody can continue on this.
I'll come back to you with very specific questions. This was just generic. I always say to my students, don't be generic, be specific, but then, we contradict ourselves. Sorry.
Well, maybe I can say, when I was thinking about this meeting this afternoon, I'll come back to your question later in a moment, but when I was thinking about this meeting this afternoon, I thought the impact of innovation, digital media on literature is quite diverse. It has influence not only on writing and producing, but also on readership, also on distribution of literature, and actually also on the market, which is another subject which also has an influence on readership. But for me, myself as a writer, I was always fascinated by film, for instance. Maybe I really wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't succeed in doing that. But actually I'm doing it in a sort of in a way that's close to poetry, because I found it very interesting to work with visual images, and noticed that it could be interesting to work together with a filmmaker or someone who could make more beautiful editing material out of found footage, and see if you could give it an extra dimension by using poetic language, spoken or visualized in the image of the movie you're making, to see if you can broaden your, let's say, the story you are going to tell, or let's say address several objects in the same time, because several subjects in the same time, because it's the image and the text that's working together. So I found it for myself a fascinating exercise. That's why I choose to work with multimedia. I'm not sure if I did answer your question.
Sure. There are so many answers to those questions. Thank you.
For me, I started as a screenwriter, and my biggest dream is to combine somehow these two professions, like to write something for your own indie movie, let's call it indie movies. But meanwhile, I realized the writing as a novelist part of my life really is not helping me as a screenwriter because it's kind of total different worlds. I was somehow too poetic in my screenplays. But on the other hand, screenwriting is really helping me while I'm working on the novel, because this three-act structure and like this dramaturgy is really helpful. And nowadays I'm working as a screenwriter only for it's for bread and butter, like it's just for money, and I can't say that I'm really complete artistic screenwriter. I'm doing some commercial things to survive.
I think actually my next question was not this, but as you mentioned screenwriting, we all watch, I think, really, literally all of us, and not only young people, we watch these TV series now, and at least I teach literature, and I write, so for me it's natural to think about certain aspects of those movies and those TV series. And I think always about writing and about how brilliant these writers are. And I find fascinating this mind-blowing explosions of characters and this character development, which is absolutely something. And it's really recent, I guess, because that's not something we are used to according to the traditional cinema. So, can you tell us about technicalities somehow? How different is writing for a TV series specifically in this case, because TV series has a bunch of spectators and followers, and I guess it's the process itself is very interesting and it's somehow different from just classical, typical traditional understanding of writing.
Well, writing for TV series is totally different experience because there are, in my case, we've been like 3 or 4 writers working on the same project. So we had the different characters and we followed to our different characters. No one was writing full story. Like for me, there was a couple of main characters and I was following them and I was developing them. And with these 4 guys in the writing room, the 4 of us have totally different skill set. So someone was really great in the dialogue, someone was really great with the structure and development of the story. So usually we divided the job and we were writing for we had the 3 different sets, like old Tbilisi, the bandits, and the government kind of stuff. So I was writing about bandits, and someone was writing about the government, and etc. So it's quite different from working on novel, because when you're working on a novel, you're alone, and you know how you start and finish. And in TV series, you must you must realize that someone finished the past scene and you must continue from there. So usually start and beginning of the scenes, like you have these outlines and you follow to them. Like it's not to be true, like it's not artistic process, at least writing for TV series. It's amazing experience. But it's kind of technical for me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege to have a screenwriter here. Really. So I wanted, you mentioned audience, and it's also, to me, it's so interesting to think about, to ask actually the writers about the audience and how much they think about the possible audience they will have in their artworks, written or not, will have, and how much the market or just or your audience defines your kind of work and your approach to it. And also, another question, may I ask you just together? I was thinking about the concept of timelessness of literature. We are used to somehow, because those timeless books we're still reading, and we know they survive, right? But when your job, your work, your art is so much connected to something very, to the current situation, current technicality, if you wish, do they survive, or will they survive? And how much you think about it? I'm not sure that the question is clear, but the audience, if you think about your audience, and also about how, because some professions or some works are somehow destined to age in a way, right? So.
Well, actually, I think I'm not giving much attention to the idea of an audience that might be interesting in my poetry. Maybe that sounds a bit odd, because I'm not writing with an audience or a readership in mind, but I do like to write, to see if I can succeed in writing poetry that could be interesting to a lot of people. Not only the people that has an enormous background in reading or know a lot about literature from the ages before us. So I hope it is interesting and open enough for everyone to get some sort of meaning out of what I'm writing. So that's important to me. And I'm very aware of the fact that because readership has changed over the years, we see, for instance, in our country, in the Netherlands, but I think it's maybe in quite some other countries as well, that the interest in literature is diminishing. There's a younger generation who is brought up with all kinds of ways of bringing about narratives, bringing about language that could stimulate your imagination. It's not only literature, it's also what's happening on TV, what's happening in all kinds of streamed and social media products that are made. So I'm very aware of the fact that you have to be careful with what you write, and if you want to be someone who can be adapted, who can get an audience, then it's good to know that there is a world outside literature which has influenced the way literature is perceived and also how literature is produced. And about the second part, well, I'm not sure if everyone which is considered as a classic writer was aware of the idea that he might be a classic writer, or he might be someone whose work would be still available and popular 2 centuries from the time he or she was writing it. So I think all writers deal with everyday society, if they're good ones, and they try to find the right words that are not too, let's say, too much of one certain contemporariness, but deals with universal values, emotions and events and things that are happening in human life that are in a way universal, because writing about when there's love or birth or death involved, that's something, of course, that's eternal in a way. As long as there's still a human society, then it will be, in human form, will be eternal. And I think all good writers have a notion of that and of what's happening in real life between real people and our relationship to the environment we're living in. So if your writing is good, it might be an eternal sort of value, representing an eternal sort of value.
Okay, Neva, can you want to say something about this?
In the terms of audience, I think that today we have for sure like hyper-production. I speak also maybe about small languages, small countries, because I come also from a small country. So I have a feeling that in Croatia we have more writers than audience.
Welcome to the club.
So when I listen to some writers who are maybe globally known, or I read something where some writer talked about audience, I'm like, there is an audience as well. And another thing is that There is another problem, I think, about the audience, and here I can touch upon like this problem with social networks. I think that everything today should become very simplified, like the literature is also becoming simplified, and audience doesn't have maybe focus, neither time. I mean, I'm talking maybe about wider audience, not now about some specific audience, but I have a feeling that actually some things shouldn't be must, and that a writer or poet, that we shouldn't always like go with the flow and with the fashion. I think even maybe if something what you write is not simplified, or maybe somebody will say it's too complicated, or I don't know what, that maybe this shouldn't be like some kind of a scale, because I noticed that yeah, somehow it's becoming simplified. And so and another question was actually it was about the audience.
Art ages, right? And I asked about this. If you think about this, that when modern technologies, well, you don't use them so much, but yeah, when modern technologies are used very much in artwork, so it's somehow, the risks are there, that they can so quickly age somehow quickly, right? Because things are, Jan mentioned, well, good stuff is always there, and the writers had no ideas that they were writing good things.
But the things with technology is that
Yes,
it becomes obsolete very, very soon.
Exactly,
Of course.
that's what
So
I
you
meant,
have
right?
a lot of things that are made in the last decades and making use of internet or some sort of a software generation which is outdated now, and you can no longer get access to it. So that's quite a problem for a technology-based literature or multimedia literature.
Generally, yes. I mean, also in visual arts, they use a lot of even more technology. So I think artists were always experimenting with technology. And generally, we live in a society which tends to be multimedia. So sometimes I also because like I said, I work a lot with visual artists, and from them I find out about also new technology experiments, or biotechnology. For example, when I lived in the Netherlands, they worked a lot with bioart and so many different media. But then I think for literature it can be good to experiment with this, but sometimes when literature experiments with other media, it can also become, the media can be wrong. It can enter also the hyper-visualization, like we talked before. Sometimes poetry, I would see some poetry films, and I would think the poem is good, but the visuals are bad, So I think it's very beautiful to combine, but sometimes one should also be aware that it shouldn't be a must.
To answer about audience, I have this observation that I'm quite young, start from here, I'm quite for literature and to write something. And I have this observation that my readers are somehow growing with me. Meanwhile, I'm gaining some readers from different generations, but still, most of them are at my age, and we're growing together, and it's really visible because of social networks. You are always available, right? Because there is a green mark next to you that you are online, and they can immediately text to you, and if you have this courage to answer them, so you answer them, then you have this immediate relationship with your reader. It's really good, but on the other hand, it's really you're somehow creating bubble outside of you, and you think that all who read your book really likes you, and what about the people who did not texted you? And they definitely don't like your book, or maybe they are shy or something like that. But yeah, it's quite interesting thing to be in touch with your readers. But on the other hand, it's maybe not as helpful as it seems at the beginning. Yeah.
Thank you. It's pretty amazing to think about how book was probably one of the most, or probably the most, the object which was the most stable and unchanged, actually, from Gutenberg's time, since it was first printed, to just a couple of decades ago. And now we're facing this transformation and this, no wonder that we use so many words now for reading. Like, I don't know, it was just reading or leafing through or something like that. Now we use scrolling and skinning and skimming and I don't know, a lot of, or navigating, and we have just a bunch of words which mean actually reading. And there are some surveys which show that the people, young people especially, but not only, consider and count as time of reading, like reading emails or just scrolling social media and stuff like that. And so it changes fundamentally and essentially the idea of reading itself and the approach of the reader to the book, right? And it just reverses and completely inverts somehow the very idea of the book. And I was wondering if this transformation we all face today change somehow the way the readers or listeners, because now we have listeners too, or spectators, every sense is somehow engaged and involved in this process of reading. And if the process of reading and enjoying poetry and books, prose or whatever it is, now that the word book itself is completely changed and doesn't mean what it has meant for centuries, right, for our generations. If the process of enjoying somehow transforms, and how, I don't know, what's your experience? Then I want to ask about your specific genres you work in, and the process of perception of a text, of your artwork.
Well, trying to get an answer to the first part of your question, I think, well, actually, of course, there's a younger generation that doesn't tend too much, maybe, in first place, to read a book. But if you look at all kinds of developments in social media, we have this so-called book talk. I'm probably you're aware of that. TikTok is one of the more popular social media forms, applications at the moment. And there's a huge new generation who is using their TikTok account to promote books. And yeah, well, I see it in the Netherlands, but also in the UK and Germany and in Western Europe and European countries. And that means that there's a lot of young people are tending to buy books. Of course, these are different books, maybe. This is more or less specified to young adult books. But there is an interest in books. And at the same time, you see that there's a generation of so-called Insta poets who work with Instagram. And of course, there is if you listen to critics, people tend to say it's more cliche, it's not very interesting what they are doing. But what I admire in this sort of development is that it gives a voice to people, especially people with color, young women, to express themselves in a very direct way and reach a public, an audience that they want to reach. Talking about their vulnerabilities, talking about their emotions, about discrimination they are facing every day. And I think that this sort of Insta poets could be a bridge to a different approach of literature. And you see that the popular Insta poets, their work is published in books, and their books are very popular. You have this famous Rupi Kaur, maybe some of you know about her name. She's a Canadian Pakistani writer, and she has collected her work in books. And I must say, from maybe a classical poetic sense, I don't find it very interesting or very elaborately done. If you look at the language or the ambiguity, that's an interesting part of poetry. But what it does, it reaches an audience who learn that there is something like poetry, and that you could express yourself in in a more poetic or image-like form than just in a conversation with your friends. And she's very popular. She sells about 200,000 copies a year in the United States alone. And it does mean that there is a market for the book, for poetry books, and maybe not for the classical ones we know, but there still are. Still people are developing from Insta, from spoken word, from slam poetry into writing for paper, or making poetry that stands out in a book form. So I'm not too pessimistic about that there will be books, that there will be poetry books, and that the readership of poetry will be superficious, or will be not that elaborate as we know it. That was your first question. I forgot your second question.
You answered in quite a comprehensive. I don't know if you wanted something, or I also wanted to. You're a young writer, and does all this, which Jan described now, somehow affect the background or the understanding of a writer? What, for example, the writing skills, are still a must, or somehow this changed too? So this is just because for just a couple of decades ago, writer was someone brilliant at writing, right? That profile also changes, right? What is the background? What are the skills and competencies, if you wish, of a writer now?
I think when we speak about social networks, I just wanted to add that, okay, I'm not an expert on this Insta poets, but I just wanted to add that I would say that we should approach like these social networks the same way like we approach other media, like we have medium of film, and this is also medium per se, and I think not every poetry or every literature is really applicable on this. So I think that's important, and what I don't like today is that now, I don't know, every writer should be like on social networks. That's just something for everybody. If you are some Instagram poet, then okay, then you probably also apply this what you write, and then it has sense, or if you make some kind of digital project, but I don't think that works for each poet or for each writer. So this is what I think is a danger, because there is for sure poetry which is not for that media, and then maybe somebody pushes it. Or also if you speak about visual arts, to a lot of visual artists, Instagram helps to sell works. So for them it's really also for selling and for showing. But you also have artworks which really look better in photography, and vice versa, which look worse in photography. So it's something what people should be aware of, and not that everybody should rush and use it. So this is just what I wanted to add.
What about the writers?
And about the writing skills, recently I was reading Orwell's 84 again, and I remember the newspeak. And I was really thinking with all these emoticons and how we communicate today generally. We communicate a lot via WhatsApp, and we write a lot of emails, and actually we read a lot, but I really have a feeling that our vocabularies are like diminishing, you know, and it's not the version of the newspeak like in Orwell, but it's some kind of other version. Also this functioning with a lot of emoticons, like using that's actually like not expressing verbally, you know.
But if I may add something to what Neva said, there are two things that I think that are remarkable. One is that considering the skill question, let's say a decade ago or 10, 15 years ago, in the Netherlands they start writing schools. Like you have creative writing studies in the United States, and a lot of writers then thought that is an impossible thing, because you have to be a talented person, and if you're talented enough, you could become a writer. And what actually happened is that a lot of people attended this school and became very good writers, very good poets, very good novelists. And it's not because they weren't untalented or talented, but it helped them to find their own voice and to learn about specific skills that could make a text into something interesting, original, mind-blowing even. And so it proved that teaching skills could lead to good literature. That's one thing. And the other thing, which is a bit connected to what Neva said about the emoticons or different languages, what I experience also in the Netherlands is that in the mixture of people coming from all different countries, language and cultures, living in a city, developing some sort of an urban language, helps to find new skills, which are very interesting because I see a lot of initiative of young people using all kinds of languages in one poem, for instance. They use Spanish words, they use American words, they use slang, they invent their own words. And I think the creativity that you can find in these sort of texts could lead to new sort of skills. And it doesn't mean that, although I know about your, I could accompany your fear, but I think there's also a new development in language and which could be enriching for all of us.
Yeah, but this what you said about the Netherlands that I experienced myself because I lived there. So basically I also wrote poetry. I have a poetry book from that time, which includes different languages. But that's more about how society is structured in the Netherlands, like because you have all these foreign people and you speak a lot of languages, so then your language somehow develops in in different way, like you take a bit of Spanish, a bit of Dutch, a bit, and I used it also actually. It's interesting that you said that.
You know, in this modern era, we are not only selling our books, we are also selling ourselves. I have this idea that typical reader is not interested only with their book. He or she is also interested with you, who you are, and that's why we are promoting ourselves on the social media, and only after we're promoting our books, because promoting yourself is way better bite click, or how to call it. And to answer another question, like we are living in the ChatGPT era right now. Yeah, artificial intellect can create amazing piece of art, but there is a huge but, and that's why I'm not afraid of artificial intelligence.
The teachers are.
Teachers are, yeah, and I think the copywriters also, but I'm sure that artists are really, we are in really safe place, because these AI generators are kind of mirror of our society, what we're giving it to, what we are feeding it. It gives the same result. So if I am somehow unique in my field of work, it can't recreate me. And I think like we are safe, at least artists. Maybe some technical guys are really screwed up, but I think we're safe. And to answer about the creative writing, I was attending the international writing program in Iowa City, and they had this amazing thing. Like, for example, they had 20 guys in creative writing group, and they knew from very beginnings that they are rising only 3 writer and 17 amazing reader, and that's another benefit for that kind of programs, that maybe someone from these 20 people of this group will become amazing critic or historian or something like that. It's really important, because writing is a skill. It's totally skill, and you need to develop it from book to book, from poem to poem.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you something more specifically about what you do actually. Okay, may I start with Neva? And you write, well, I have here short stories, picture books. Picture books, I was thinking like graphic novels, or picture books are more kids, right? If I understand it correctly.
Yes, but it's also, usually I collaborate with other visual artists, because I work as a curator, I studied art history. So I don't work only as a curator, but I make collaborations with visual artists. So for example, with filmmakers / video artists from Iran and Netherlands, I made like this short experimental film, and now we are also working on a new project with my colleague from Croatia. He illustrated these two books for children. Actually, like I really see art and literature as a dialogue. I like learning from others, and these other artists always give me so much. I couldn't be only just writing my book and that's the only thing which I do. I like doing also that, but I learned so much from my collaborators actually. And also about other media, because for example, if you think about the media of film, now I remembered when we had this discussion that me and Sara, we had this short talk also about different media. So it's also interesting how, for example, film is a media which is dictated. You need to go to the cinema and there you're closed in this, black box. While poetry, you read poetry even when we had only books, like when there was no internet. Still, when you read a book, you read it in a bar and maybe you hear the voice of somebody, still you're affected of the world around you. So it's also interesting to think about that, how certain context dictates the certain media.
Right. And you also write for the theater, right?
No, I don't write for theater. I just wrote like a couple of theater plays, and one was actually on a radio, but it was not staged in the theater.
Okay.
So I like also this audio medium. I think that's actually like in a way future, like podcast or audio play, because we are getting fed up with visuals because everything is a visual. So like lately I started to listen to a lot of radio plays because it's so, it relaxes you and they are so well done. In Croatia we still have this tradition on the radio that we that they make radio plays.
Right, because we are like spending half day in the traffic in the car.
Yes,
so
it's totally,
quite practically. I'm also thinking about it.
So I think that has a future, podcast.
Definitely, with traffic jams especially. Okay, yeah, thank you. Jan, I was so interested to ask you about this data poems. I Googled, I didn't find many things about it. Yeah, and poetry films also.
Yeah.
So can you just share with us something about this genre?
Well, data poems, of course, I invented the word myself, but it's just simple because I started making them when I was invited by a magazine who wanted to have a contribution about poetry or literature in general, which has something to do with the internet, but not publishing a poem in a website or something like that, but much more involved in the techniques of the internet. And so with my partner in crime, so to say, Alfred Marseille, with whom I make these films and other things, we came up with an idea of see if we can could make something which makes use of the behavior of people on the internet. And one of the things we did was, for instance, I made a poem in an enormous amount of variations, strong ones and small ones. So on a word level and on a line level and in a stanza level. So one poem in about 50 different variations. And we connected it to the server that is used by the Amsterdam stock market. And if the stock market, the exchange rate is going up, then the poem changes in a more positive way. And if the market goes down, then all the negative words appear in the poem. And that's the behavior of the market was something that influenced the poem.
So it's not just sound, but content, you mean?
It's content, yes. And then it was interesting to do, and actually we get access to this server but with a time interval, because they didn't want us to be in a real-time connection, otherwise we could influence the market. So it has to be a couple of seconds or minutes later. So we managed to do that, and it was great, but it also shows you one of the flaws of technically involved poetry, because nowadays it's not functioning any longer because they changed the server. There was a software update, and we try to adapt to that, to adapt our program, but in the end it was impossible to adapt it every year in order to make it work again. But that's one of the examples of the data poem, and we try to do the same thing in Brussels, in making a program that could be screened in a bus or in a tram, following a line through Brussels, and making it changeable with people going in the bus or out of the bus. But actually the public transport company didn't allow us to make use of their server, so that project failed. But this a form of data poems that we worked on. Yeah.
It's amazing. And also, well, yeah, poetry films also.
Yes.
It's quite interesting too. And then I wanted to ask you about these sound pieces and installations. You work with installations, visual artists, as I guess.
Yeah, well, that's another advantage of the technical developments of the latest years, because of the digitization of all kinds of enormous amounts of material, also film material. And there's a wonderful website. If you don't know it, you must see to it. It's called archives.org. It's an American website, and it collects all kinds of films, TV material, and some of the material, especially one of the archives, is called the Prellinger Archive, and Robert Prellinger was one of the archivists of early movies and all kinds of film material. Most of those material is digitized, and it's public domain, so there are no rights involved, so you can make free use of it. And what I do with Alfred Marseille is that we're searching this enormous archive and see if we can find interesting film material, and then we work with it, we cut it into pieces, we do a different order, and we put our own soundtrack to it, add some visual text in it, and that's how we make our poetry films. And what we are trying to do, not to, like the example that Nevan had said about you could have a poetry film and the poem is okay, but the visuals are bad. It might be that our products have the same flaw. That's not, I can't say that they're not have bad spots in it, but what we are trying to do is to work together. He is coming up with some images he found, or I found an interesting film, and then we talk about it, where is this film about? How can we use it into something that we find interesting to use, to add a different story to the material, come up with a new narrative, and then I'll start writing some lines, and he is commenting on it. And so in a sort of conversation between us, we're working together, and in the end, we make a new film out of found footage with new text and a new soundtrack. And that's how we usually make our poetry films.
Writing becomes more and more, I'd say, collective activity. It was meant to be something very intimate and private, and a person alone staying there writing. And now it's completely. I mean,
it's nice to work together with someone else, with other people, because they can bring you into new ideas, of course, and that's fine. That's what I find fascinating about collaborating with other artists.
Definitely, it's so enriching. And Eva, do you want to add something? Okay, I wanted to ask. Well, I am a person working for educational institutions for so many years. So, and just, I think, inevitably about this. Any suggestions, I don't know, for younger generations of people, because what you guys describe requires many things. Bunch of knowledge and competences and technicality and skills and capability, I don't know, being constantly up to date and stuff like that. So what are the skills and knowledge and competences, again, needed to somehow to perform and to succeed in this world? And how this need, if you wish, of multidisciplinarity can be integrated in the educational programs, if it's possible, or if you think it's needed or it's good to do something like that. And well, now, and especially now, when the very value or the very idea of formal education is somehow, well, declining at least, if not disappearing, right? So young people think about education in a completely different way, different from myself, for example. So what can be done for education, and how all this knowledge and all these requirements can be integrated in this? Never.
I think that depends on the educational system and how much educational system is open to collaborate also with artists or different, I don't know, different professionals. And so I don't work in the school, so I don't know how is it there today.
Space for that.
Did it become more open-minded? Because in Croatia it was always quite limited system, but I think today it's opening a bit. But I think it would always be good to have some side programs which would include like workshops. Workshop is something that's very popular today, and there are many different interesting workshops which artists can offer, like to children in school. And also these artists or writers or whoever, like, they never have this approach as a teacher, because workshop is something else. So, and there at these workshops, children can express themselves. Because, for example, I also lead some kind of workshops with my colleague. She is like into body movement. So we have some workshop together, which we lead like since 2015, and there we worked with a lot of different groups, and people actually create artworks which are a bit performative, but they also include like they create like their own poetry. And that, for example, these kind of things function, I think, very well for people to express themselves, because in school somehow we don't get a chance so much to express ourselves. And actually it's amazing what people can do only like in 2 days, and how many ideas they have. And basically it's like almost anybody can be an artist, like what kind of ideas people get. So, and children especially, because they're more open. So, but it's difficult to speak about that, because I don't know how it's in Georgia in educational system. Do you have that kind of side program or not?
Old-fashioned.
So I think this kind of a little bit more, also with new technologies, the children, they probably teach themselves these new technologies. They know much better than us, but still to bring them some people who are professionals, and to teach them, I don't know, how to design something, for example, or you have so many different programs, or for the film editing, you know, like this kind of things should already be incorporated in the school curriculum, because they can also earn money out of it. You don't need to become an artist, but you can always somehow, it's an extra skill which can help you to find a job.
Yeah, well, I think what the Netherlands are concerned, I think the possibility to pay attention to literature or to poetry depends a lot on the teacher. And there's a strict system, a curriculum which has to be followed. So it's the enthusiastic approach of a certain teacher if he wants to give more attention to literature, to poetry. And we have some sort of facilities, because there's the School of Poetry, it's called, in the Netherlands, and that's focusing on having workshop or poetry writing, and even a poetry battle, it's like in the slam poetry with school classes, and it's very effective. And we have the school writer system. If you're a school and you want to have you can apply to an organization who is doing that, and you can invite a writer to the school who's talking about his or her work, and that goes from little children books writers into adult literature. We have an enormous day of literature program. That's one day in the year, and all kinds of schools are coming to. In fact, it's in Rotterdam, a very large theater, and all the well-known authors from the Netherlands are assembled there, and then you have a meet and greet, and you have all kinds of programs as a school kid with these writers you're fond of, and this helps to be aware of that there is literature. It is possible to write interesting stories that reflect your own life, and that's. But I think the main problem is that it depends on the school and on the teachers involved if they want to work with this program or not. If you're not interested in literature, yeah, you could easily skip all these sort of initiatives, and no one will care, and no one will be angry about that, I'm afraid.
I had a couple of workshops, and I realized that I can't teach, I only can share my experience, and the main thing what we can do for younger generation is to give them like full pictures that it's not romantic job, like it's just ordinary job where you are struggling, there is no money, and to give them full picture like how the literary world works at all. And because this, our educational system, it's not old-fashioned, it's in Stone Age. And only thing what I learned in the film university was to resist cheap alcohol, and that's all. Like that's only knowledge they gave me. So maybe we need to rethink all this system, and I don't know, like giving to share our experience, not because I'm not sure that someone is on the position to teach how to write in Georgia, because we don't have a standardized system of it, and we are teaching from our experience, and my experience is totally different from someone's, and I only can share, I can't teach. That's why I think that teaching right now, creating writing, is not the right idea.
I also think that these digital skills are so fundamental, because it happened to me to hear even the parents who say that, well, if kids have some digital editing, for example, you mentioned digital editing, it's so requested and it's always needed and it's always well paid and stuff like that, so they don't even need formal education and stuff like that, and the kids also go in that direction quite often. Yeah, you agree with that?
Yeah, because everything is like amazing skill. If you know Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, it's an amazing skill. And just don't ignore the fact that there is a totally new language. Writing websites and code is totally different language. It's universal, and anyone can talk on that language. It's kind of future of maybe even for writing.
Talking to a teacher, my dear.
Oh, I know. Sorry.
Yeah, also actually video games, like so many like visual artists and even writers, they work like with video games. Yeah.
There's an amazing example, like there's a game from Poland called Witcher. It's kind of national treasure for them, like as we are giving the, what is the name? They are giving this Witcher video game to the official guests. Because it's kind of modern era, and it's modern. What's the word for that? Okay, you understand.
Okay, I understand that. But you all started, right, with writing, traditional writing. Am I right or no?
Yeah, and still do. I still make books.
Yes, we are still traditional.
That's so
I was
encouraging.
one of the worst poets. I started as a poet, and I was one of the worst, really. Like, I sucked in amazing way. Like, my poems was total disaster, but it gave me amazing opportunity.
That's
to
what
switch.
you think or what others think?
General audience. My mother told me that, son, just quit.
Okay, I understand that. I don't know if we have room for questions. If you feel, yes, to ask or...
Here's the question.
ხო. მე მგონი მიკროფონში უნდა თქვა, იმიტომ რომ გადათარგმნოს ესე you have to, you have to put, please, ერთი წამი, please. კაი, ხო, თუ გინდა რა ვიცი უთხარი. Or I can translate maybe. I'll try, okay. The authors became really impatient. Became real impatient. No patience anymore.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Before, the writers knew that they needed a certain amount of time to somehow to reach their audience. And they were well aware of the fact that they needed to somehow go through certain steps before the book was published, like it was selection, editing, and all those steps which publishing business implies. And now the authors know that as soon as they just put the final full stop to their writing, they can just perform in front of them, of the audience, and present the works to the audience, to the readers. I fight very much with myself, but I have to admit that it happens to me that as soon as I finish something, writing something, and I want to publish it immediately. Online გამოქვეყნებას გულისხმობ, ხო? Yeah, online and social media or something.
აი ეს ხო არსებობს ძალიან დაბლა მთლიანობაში ამ ლიტერატურის ხარისხი. მაგრამ ძალიან ბევრი რაღაცა ესეთი მოუწესრიგებელი გაუცხრილავი გაურედაქტირებელი ტექსტი მოდის ჩვენამდე.
Do you think that this process, this lack of patience in writers, in authors, somehow affects negatively the quality of literature, quality of text, because a lot of, how to say, unfiltered and not really well elaborated texts reach audience without any, step which was meant to be there before?
თუმცა შეიძლება იყოს რაღაც პოზიტივებიც ამაში და ავტორის ამ მდგომარეობაზე რომ ვილაპარაკოთ საინტერესო.
Obviously, there may be some advantages, some positive sides also in this process, but I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about him?
Well, actually, I think, there still are publishing companies, there still are people who bring about books or and have a strong editing process. And I can imagine, what I experience is that although it is possible to directly publish a text, a poem, a short story, or whatever, online via social media or via your own website or something like that, or a blog post, there are a lot of people who do that, who actually want to have a book in the end. And if you want to have a book published, of course, you have all kinds of possibilities to print it or to publish it your own, but then you don't have the benefit of a distribution channel which reaches all kinds of bookshops. So actually a lot of young writers still wants to have a book published with let's say a very professional literary publishing company, because they can have a book out broadly in the whole country. And if you're going into that and the publishing company sees something in what you are doing, then you get all these editing and talking about the book and ask you to be patient because it needs some extra work, it needs some extra time to finalize it. So this still is going on. And to my experience, a lot of people want to have this well-educated, well-published, well-professionally guided book published. So that leads into being more patient than just putting it online, press it, and it gets it into the open.
It always depends what are you looking for. If you're looking for the audience and readers, maybe you need to wait. But if you're looking for like, share, and subscribe, and this is 3 most used words in the internet, that come on, just publish it. And someone will like, someone will share, and someone will subscribe.
I think it also has another side. I think it again depends on a writer, because, for example, I spoke to one writer and he told me that he started publishing some kind of stuff on Facebook, and that he really saw his own development in 5 years, because he saw it also as some kind of a writing workshop. So then people were giving him comments on Facebook, and he actually improved some stuff for that reason. But okay, maybe he was not such an established writer, so for him was a good thing. But on the other hand, I think that this impatience also results in lack of literature criticism also, because in the end everything is about the like. So people publish something very impatiently, then audience likes it. You don't even know did they read it. That's also what I really don't like, to be honest. It's anyway, you don't know, you just get this like. And then in the end, dislikes are more important than what profession says. Nobody cares anymore what some critic says. There is no even literature criticism. So I think that's the downside. But for some people, like for that writer, it can be also helpful.
Free consultancy or editing is always good if you need it. Okay, Kida. Yeah.
My question is to Jan. My question is...
ხო, არ მაშინ მე ქართულად თარგმნი, okay, go on. არა, იმიტომ რომ ისა მიკროფონს თუ არ დაიჭერთ, ვერ გაიგებს ის თარჯიმანი. არა, უბრალოდ რატო? მადლობა, აივა.
My question is to Jan. It's a little off the topic, but I'll take a chance. Okay. You are the director of the biggest Poetry International Festival, right? Rotterdam, right?
Well, actually not the director. I was the programmer, head of the programming, so I was responsible for the content of the festival.
Oh, that's even interesting. Okay, so my question is, how do you, can you please describe the process of choosing poets who you want to invite to your poetry festival?
Well, it's a process in which are a lot of people involved. Actually, what we did is we're reading a lot of poetry books that are available. Of course, they're not in all languages. We can't. I'm afraid that the team where I was one of the members of, we don't know all the languages. So it was for instance, I had no one in the team who could read Georgian, for instance, language. So we needed translations. And which was very important still is we need advice from translators. So we had an enormous network of translators, and what we did is if we had a poet in the festival from let's say Sri Lanka or Thailand or Japan or Argentina, we asked the poets, could you advise us if you're back in your country and you come across a very interesting new poet in your country, please let us know. And we try to make a proof translation to see if it's an interesting poet. And besides, of course, a subjective, but we try to objectify it as much as possible, but still it's a subjective choice if we like it or not. we also try to get poetry together, poets together within a certain theme of the festival. So, for instance, if we are organizing a festival about what we did about the future, for instance, a couple of years ago, then we try to find interesting poets from all over the world that are dealing with this subject. Is there a future? Can we write about the future? Are people still positive about the future or only negative? And so we try to find and select within this theme. And another thing is that we always tried to have a certain equilibrium between men, women, black poets, poets with a different cultural heritage. So it's a bit of a broad representation of what is going on in the world. That's how we try to do it. And of course we always miss important poets. Then you learn 1 or 2 years later that we should have invited this one because she is so great, and we totally missed it. But yeah,
Wow,
that's how it goes if you want to hold the world.
Even if the act of creation has become interdisciplinary, as we all see, is it still possible to write, for example, 300 pages of a stream of consciousness, be it with visual elements added? I mean, is it possible to gain any unity in the text? Or we have to work with pieces of senses, kind of a cut-up reality. And the second question is, what about the subject, which is beyond of all these fragments of expression? Is it still possible to figure him out, or we are dissolved in representation?
For subject, you mean the
Subject,
plot?
yes, I mean the narrator, person who, the state beyond the maybe identities, representations, texts, kind of a narrator, I think a narrator. Is it still possible to figure him out, or we are dissolved? There is nothing.
And you meant to create a narrator and a unity in it, within a large text, which also uses other media, or?
I mean, media is a fragmented thing. Yes, I mean, we see in newsfeed elements of senses, Instagram, anything. And is it still possible to gain unity in the act of creation, or there is nothing? We just.
I should think it depends on the author. What I can imagine is that if you're working with all this sort of information or all these things that come to you, then maybe it's interesting as a writer to show the vision of all these fragmented elements that are part of our world. I think if you're a contemporary writer and you want to give a good place to all these sort of fragmented elements that are in our daily life, then maybe you should avoid having unity. But I think it depends on the writer, on the creator, if you can find some unity in combining all these things. But it's a difficult task if you want to have everything like Instagram feeds, that sort of information, and visual, and movies, and all kinds of styles that you can develop into writing, into poetry or other literature. It's a huge task, but yeah.
It's a task, yeah.
But I think it can be done, but it's something that needs time and patience, which Shota was talking about. So yeah, I think it can be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, he also had a question.
Run out of time, but just
ინტერაქციულ ნოველებზე მაინტერესებს. ინტერაქციულ ნოველებზე. ეს არის რაღაცა თამაშები, სადაც მწერალი წერს რამდენიმე სცენარის ბილიქს. კითხველი რო კითხულობს,
ერთი წამივით მე ხო იმიტომ იმაში არ მკეთიებ interactive novels.
ინტერაქციულ ნოველებს მწერალი რამდენიმე ბილიქს წერს სცენარის განვითარების. მაგალითად, სხვადასხვა პერსონაჟს დაწერს, სხვადასხვა რაღაცა აცვია, სხვადასხვა ორიენტაცია აქვს, სხვადასხვა ეროვნება აქვს.
ერთი და იგივე პერსონაჟებზე ამას.
კი ბატონო.
Sometimes the writer images different passes.
Yeah.
Ways of
Like in a video
for
game.
the same character.
Yeah, it's like in a video game.
თამაშები ახსენეთ და თამაშის ფორმატში გვხვდება ხოლმე აპლიკაციები და საიტების საშუალებით თამაშობენ მკითხველები, უბრალოდ კითხულობენ, თამაშობენ.
And the reader is like involved in this game.
Yes, yes. Yeah, now you have like
შეკითხოს დავასრულე. და მაინტერესებს რამე საფრთხე თუ შეიძლება კონდეს იმ ამ შემთხვევაში, როცა მწერალი ინტერაქციულ ნოველებს წერს, არის ძალიან დემოკრატიული მოვლენა, რადგან მკითხველი თავად წვიტავს ვინ იყოს, რომელი ეროვნებისაც ცხოვრობდეს, რა სიტუაცია შემთხვევას, რა არ შემთხვევას, რას არიდოს თავი, happy end-ით დასრულდეს თუ ცუდად
And this
დასრულდეს.
interactive way of writing is very democratic in a way because the reader decides themselves what the ending can be, what belonging can he or she have and stuff like that.
და შეკითხვა მაქვს, რამდენად ხედავს რისკის ქვეშ მწერალი თავს, რომ თვითონ იყოს ავტორიტეტული მწერალი, თვითონ გადაწყვიტოს როგორ დაამთავრებს, საწაიყვანს პერსონას და
ასეთ შემთხვევებში,
კი, ასეთ შემთხვევაში risks თუ ხედავს ესეთი.
What are the risks for the author in these cases? Because somehow you lose authorship, right? Because the reader decides the ending or some development of the plot and so on. Is there any?
I think that kind of medium existed also before, like you had books. In Croatia we read these books which had more endings for children, yes. Yeah, so that's nothing so new, but I think now this is in development. I went to one workshop, I was just curious, so I went to the workshop which actually dealt with that kind of writing, but that's actually many times writing which is used like in commercial purposes and also like tourism purposes. Like, so then you have like physical space and you connect it to digital, and then the audience, they decide their own way, but you also have like a physical world included. But I think that's the specific way of writing. It's completely something different to write for that kind of medium.
Usually that works in video games and in literary, like Alitra Publishing House used to write something like that a couple years ago, and I think it's more commercial. If you need to choose everything from the beginning to the end while you are buying this specific author right by yourself, it will be way better. If you need to choose everything, like while you're buying a book from us, you can write the type of book by yourself. I think it's not risk for the writer, it's risk for the reader, that he or she will get exactly what she wants, and books are not meant to do that. Like, books are the thoughts of one person. It's really subjective and really rude and not competent in some kind of...
Last question?
And then...
I'm a writer who is poet writing directly on Facebook. I'm just open the Facebook, write my poem and post. And during all comments, I edit all the time, tons of time, edit the text. And so I realized that this new relationship in social media changed the role of reader and changed the literature nature itself. What do you think about that? Is this changes challenging or really something new that we have to recognize and to make a new normal thing, new experience?
If I can answer that question, I think it adds something. I think it can be a new form of writing which stands next to writing books in the classical way, and I think it's an interesting development. And if you could say it's still a young technique, you know, if in publishing directly on Facebook, have comments from others, and even adapting your poem because of the comments that you get. If you want to try to bring it out and invite people to add something to the poem, or say, well, why don't you change this line into something else? It might be interesting, but it's a way that I think it will, if it's done interesting in an exciting way, then there will be authors who will work this way. Maybe you're one of the first who is going to set a standard to this sort of work, but I think maybe it will influence other initiatives. Maybe other people will be interested in writing something maybe for a book, but I know a couple of people who had within their own community on Facebook are working on a text, a short story, for instance, or a longer poem, and have 2 or 3 different endings of the story of or the poem, and they present it to their own community and ask which one is the preferable one. Should I do this one or that one? And in the end, maybe if someone says you should do that one, and 90 out of 100 people said you have to do the first one, he probably will choose for the second one because he's an individual author. But there are people who are working with this sort of concepts, and it might be interesting, apart from still being your own editor, your own author, and making your choices yourself. But it's an interesting, besides the normal classical way.
In film industries, they are using the focus groups. They are presenting for example, the pilot of the new TV series, and the focus group somehow affects of the story development. But I'm not sure that is a good thing in the literature, because you are the only one who need to decide if this thing is finished or not.
Yeah, I think if you get too many comments, it can be confusing. So I think you need to have focus groups, because I know that when I would show my work to like 7 people, it would already be like, no, too much. Yeah. Two max 3, and that's it. I don't want so many opinions, because each person has her own opinion. I mean, then but focus groups, yes, then maybe that makes sense.
Maybe you could ask people in your focus group if they want to have it changed, they have to pay for it. So you have a business model in literature.
Focus group, you want to listen to the opinion before to publish or produce something, and then to adapt across. But in my case, I sometimes do something very not politically correct, against the ratings of people.
Yeah. Sure.
But sometimes I really put the whole parts of some text inside, and in that way, even the commenter becomes such a co-author.
Yeah. Nice.
I think we ran out of the time. Thank you very much, but I wanted to say that we have our authors in readings in the evening, so you can enjoy the readings, poetry readings today, tomorrow. You're today, right? Both of you, or you're tomorrow? Okay. Jan is today, Neva is tomorrow, so please attend the evenings and listen to poetry readings. Thank you very much for your attendance and for being this so interesting. Thanks to our guests. And
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you.
ექვსი შევიკრიბებით შემდეგი ღონისძიებისთვის ინგა გაილეს პოეზიის საღამო. ისევ აქ.